Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Round 2 Applicant webinar. I am Rose Lee. I'm the co-director of the A2 Coordinating Center, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I want to also introduce Dr. Marcel Salive, one of the NIA program officials for the AITC program, to welcome you with some introductory remarks on behalf of our sponsor, the National Institute on Aging. Dr. Salive?
Thanks, Rose. I'm Marcel Salive from the Division of Geriatrics at NIA, and I'm happy to be here today to welcome everyone to the AITC Round 2 Applicant webinar. The AITCs really represent to us a way for us to invest in national priorities of artificial intelligence to promote AI innovation in areas of fundamental and applied science like biotech, advanced computing, robotics, material science, and to promote innovation, particularly as it applies to aging. So we look forward to seeing your work and hearing about it as we go through the application process. Back to you, Rose.
Thank you very much, Marcel. Just as background for the current competition, we received more than 220 applications for pilot projects. If you were invited to join today's call, you're part of the select group of 94 invited to advance to the second round for final consideration by one of the AITCs for funding. Almost 40% of invited round 2 applicants are led by a startup or small business. Our goal today is to highlight and address areas of possible concern in the round 2 application process and provide tips to help you formulate the most competitive round 2 application. We'll spend about 5 minutes on application resources and evaluation criteria, about 15 minutes quickly reviewing application components that we want to make sure you are clear on, and about 15 minutes on application tips and what you can expect post-application before opening it up to about 20 minutes of questions. Please hold your questions until the Q&A portion, and remember that we're focusing on the application process today rather than questions about individual projects, which should be directed to the AITCs offline. This video call is being recorded, and the plan is to post the recording on the A2 Collective's YouTube channel, which is unrestricted, minus any applicant Q&A. We'll also post this slide deck for your future reference. The following representatives from the AITC program are on the call to take your questions. The PIs of the AITCs and Coordinating Center are highlighted in orange font. And you'll see this slide again later. So we also have Rebecca Krupenovich and Marcel Salive joining from the NIA. Okay, and the dates that are of relevance after today. Today's the webinar on July 1st. Applicants can seek additional consultation with AITC to develop their round 2 application, which is due July 30th. The goal is to finalize the awards, which requires NIA review and concurrence in the fall of 2024, with projects expected to begin in early 2025. Just as in round 1, round 2 evaluators are asked to consider a number of criteria and to provide an overall score and comments. The plan is to provide timely feedback to all applicants, however brief. AITCs may give additional consideration to projects that leverage the resources or facilities or generate data sets, software, or hardware that might benefit the AITC research community at large. Other areas of consideration might include go-to-market strategy, regulatory reimbursement pathways, and mitigation of health disparities across the United States, including improving access to and delivery of care in rural areas. Please note that any project that has been awarded SBIR, STTR, or any other NIH research funding for the same or very similar work is not eligible due to overlap. Dr. Kayla Har will address this and other components of the application in more detail next.
Thanks, Rose. So the primary components of the round 2 application can be grouped into the 6 sections that you see here. A2 pilot award submission, overlap, and data and resource sharing policies, project details, relevance, and conflict of interest, project-specific aims and research strategy, detailed budget and budget justification, personnel and performance sites, and human subjects research policies and ethics. So today we'll discuss data and resource sharing, budget and human subjects research and ethics in some detail, while touching more lightly on the other application components, which generally are quite similar to or expansions of what was requested in the round 1 application. I do want to briefly highlight a few key points about those sections that we won't discuss in as much detail today before we move on to these highlighted sections. So in the first section of the application, you'll be asked about overlap with other federal funding. As Rose just indicated, an applicant with a prior small business innovation research or small business technology transfer or similar NIH award cannot receive an A2 pilot award for advancement of the previously funded technology, but they could receive a pilot award for novel technological development distinct from what was supported previously. If you're unsure whether your proposed project might overlap with prior funding received, please discuss that with your AITC before submitting the round 2 application. And if you're under consideration for other funding that is pending, be sure to disclose any overlapping awards as soon as they do arise. As you complete the round 2 application, we also ask that you review the conflict of interest reference list provided in the application. Again, this is the same that was provided in round 1, but we ask that you review it and evaluate whether your project team has any conflicts while taking into account any changes to the team that might have occurred since you submitted the round 1 application. Conflicts do not disqualify you from funding, but it is critical to inform us of them to ensure a fair review process. Also, be sure to note the page limits for the specific aims and research strategy submissions, and please do not exceed them. Citations and letters of support, which are strongly encouraged but not required, do not count toward that page limit. But if you want to include figures, charts, illustrations, you're welcome to do so, but it needs to be within the 1-page limit for the specific aims and 3 pages for the research strategy. Projects can be proposed by a single applicant institution, or they can involve multiple institutions in collaboration, in which one institution is designated the prime applicant institution, and if funded, would make subawards to one or more other institutions included in the application. There's a difference in how Mass AITC structures awards for multi-institutions that we'll talk about a little bit later. But for multi-institution projects at large, you should keep in mind that all pilot project work must be completed in the United States unless foreign clearance is obtained from NIH. If your project includes a subcomponent that would require foreign clearance, we recommend that you discuss that component of the project with the AITC prior to submitting your application, and also address that component in your research strategy. The project must have a principal investigator who will function as the contact PI and is associated with the US-based prime applicant institution. And that means that if your project involves multiple institutions collaborating, co-PIs and MPIs could come from subaward institutions, but they cannot serve as contact PI for the project. Multi-institution projects should also begin intellectual property negotiations early and have them resolved prior to confirmation of funding to avoid delays. Also be aware that multi-site pilots selected for funding will be subject to a single institutional review board requirement if they involve non-exempt human subjects research. So now turning to the sections that we will discuss in more detail, and beginning with data and resource sharing. Per NIH policy, pilots funded by the AITC program are expected to share non-proprietary pre-competitive data. The round 2 application includes submission of a completed A2 collective data and resource sharing plan agreement, which asks applicants to describe the data that will be collected during the pilot project and indicate plans for data sharing. We do realize that data collected will vary significantly across projects, as will the nature of the data that can be shared. To help enable productive sharing of some quantity of data, the JHAITC Data Integration and Quality Core is working to establish a set of top-down common data variables for all pilots to collect and share via Johns Hopkins housed data commons. And I'd like to invite the director of that core, Dr. Chris Shute, to provide a brief update on that effort and some insight on data and resource sharing expectations now.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to do so, and welcome. As you might appreciate, we expect that there could be substantial synergy among AITC partners and colleagues using data that has been mutually collected to increase the power and increase the predictive value of some variables. That being said, we recognize the significant heterogeneity of the data and projects that comprise AITC programs, and thus the top-down approach is an effort to have a commonality that would advantage all of you who would have access to the commons as you see to incorporate in your own analytics. The top-down variables are not particularly obscure. They are things like demographics, medications, diagnoses, and some survey instruments on cognitive functionality and functioning. That is, we've made them relatively simple, and we've enabled REDCap resources to collect them if you choose to use them. You would all have access to the data commons and the data contained therein. And I do want to emphasize there is no expectation that competitive data or proprietary data would be required or encouraged to be put into the commons. This is data to help all boats rise higher and synergize the consortium.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shute. All right, so now we'll turn to the budget components of the application. In the round one application, you were asked to provide an estimated total budget for project direct costs, which cannot exceed $200,000. In round two, you'll break that total cost down quite a bit further by submitting an NIH detailed budget that itemizes project costs. The round two application includes a fillable detailed budget form, as well as an annotated copy of the form for you to download and use as a reference. So the detailed budget contains 2 pages, which are shown here, a detailed budget for direct costs labeled form page 4, which is on the left here, and a checklist form page used to indicate facilities and administrative or F&A indirect cost rates and base, which is shown on the right here. I'm displaying the annotated version, which just includes those instructions on how to complete each portion of the form. So if you are a single institution applicant, then you'll complete both of these pages. And if your project involves multiple institutions collaborating, then you will need to submit a detailed budget and a written budget justification for each of the institutions involved in the project. Now, there are some differences, as I mentioned, for how multi-institution applicants will complete the budget form shown here, depending on the AITC that the application is being submitted to. So speaking first for JHAITC and Penn AI Tech multi-institution applicants, only the prime applicant institution should complete the checklist form page, which is on the right side here, and includes statement of that prime institution's indirect costs and rate. The prime institution also lists any sub-award institutions' indirect costs total on the consortium contractual F&A line of the detailed budget form page 4. And that's that form page on the left here. And the last sort of red box highlights that line, that explanatory box on the left page highlights the consortium contractual F&A line that I'm referencing. Collaborating sub-award institutions that are applying to JHAITC or Penn AI Tech should not complete the checklist page that's shown on the right. Only the prime institution would be doing that. But those collaborating sub-award institutions should list their own indirect costs on their own institution's detailed budget form and their indirect cost rate in their own written budget justification. For Mass AITC applicants, Mass AITC structures the awards differently, so it's not a prime institution making sub-awards to sub-institutions, and that impacts how Mass AITC multi-institution applicants should complete these forms. Mass AIT has already provided all of its round 2 applicants with specific budget instructions that address those differences, so you should reference those instructions and follow up with the AITC if you have further questions. For all applicants, when you're planning overall project budget, we do ask that you consider potential costs for participant recruitment and preparing for IRB submission if applicable. Small companies without their own IRB who are eligible to use the A2 Collective Coordinating Center's central IRB service, which covers cost of IRB submission. but you would want to still keep in mind potentially needing to allocate resources for preparing IRB materials or engaging consultants to support that process if necessary. Finally, do keep in mind that award funds are provided on a reimbursement basis, which means awarded project teams must be able to fund their first milestone upfront and then subsequently receive reimbursement from the AITC. Project teams invoice for expenses on a schedule that's set with the AITC, such as quarterly or monthly. So as I mentioned, applicants also must submit a written budget justification that provides detailed explanation of the costs included in the detailed budget form. We have an example budget justification available to illustrate the format and level of detail required, which is displayed here, and also available as a downloadable resource on the application as well as on our website. And again, if you're a multi-institution applicant, each collaborating institution should provide a budget justification, and sub-award institutions should state their indirect F&A rate in that budget justification. Note that if your institution does not already have a federally negotiated F&A rate, you must use the de minimis F&A rate of 10%. And also keep in mind that small business innovation research and small business technology transfer rates and policies do not apply to this program and cannot take the place of a federally negotiated F&A rate. As we turn to human subjects research and ethics, I do want to note that about 2/3 of the projects invited to round 2 in this year's competition indicated plans to involve human subjects, and almost 90% of applicants invited to round 2 indicated that your project team includes at least one member with prior human subjects research experience. So we expect that this is familiar information to most of you, and will largely focus on directing you to resources that you can consult for more information and clarification for your specific study. So the round 2 application contains questions about human subjects research that were also part of the round 1 application, but these should be revisited and considered carefully in the context of the study design you are proposing in your round 2 application, which might include changes that are responsive to AITC feedback on your study aims from the round 1 application. For all of the questions on the application about human subjects, we provide links both on the application and in these slides, which we will be sharing, that define human subjects research, exemption, and clinical trials, and will help you determine how to answer these questions. A few important points to note: if you believe that you are conducting exempt human subjects research, it still must be reviewed by an IRB and confirmed to be exempt if it has not been already. So if you do not already have an exempt determination from an IRB, but you believe your project is exempt, you will have the option to pursue an exemption determination after being approved for funding. If you already have an exemption determination, we have a portion of the application for you to enter that information. Pilot awardees also will have the option to access the A2 Collective's subscription to training from Advara that can satisfy the NIH requirements for PI training on human subjects protection. And as I noted earlier, pilot awardees may also be eligible to use the A2 Collective Central IRB depending on the study parameters and institutional affiliations involved. Do note that clinical trials are not eligible for funding in the 4th annual A2 Pilot Awards, and that does mean no part of your study design can fall under the NIH definition of a clinical trial. The application includes a series of questions to help you confirm that your proposed project is not a clinical trial, and your specific aims and research strategy also need to clearly reflect a study design that does not include any components that would be considered a clinical trial. If you are not sure whether your study design involves human subjects, may be considered exempt, or would constitute a clinical trial, NIH provides a wealth of resources to help determine that. And in particularly, we encourage using these 2 NIH decision tools on human subjects research and clinical trials that are shown on screen before completing the round 2 application, to not only ensure accurate answers to human subjects research questions on the application, but also to identify any modifications you might need to make to ensure the study you're proposing is eligible for funding, or other points related to study design that may require follow-up discussion with the AITC inviting your round 2 application. The NIH sites that house these tools also include detailed definitions, examples, case studies, and frequently asked questions that can all help clarify how your proposed study would be classified and the requirements that it would be subject to. The round 2 application also includes a series of questions that ask applicants to engage in ethical consideration of their proposed research. These questions are intended to prompt reflection on the complex ethical dimensions that can emerge in research at the intersection of AI and work with older adults, including those who are cognitively impaired. The goal is to proactively identify potential ethical considerations relevant to the project that might inform study design, IRB submission, or further discussion with AITC mentors. And on this slide, I'm just sharing some links to some of the resources related to human subjects research that I've mentioned, including NIH definitions and decision tools, and a video clip from a previous A2 Pilot Awards webinar that provides a more step-by-step walkthrough of using the NIH Human Subjects Decision Tool. Also included are links to a publication by the 2 co-leads of Penn AI Tech's Ethics and Policy Core that outlines key ethical considerations for developing and testing minimal risk devices, as well as a separate publication on addressing the impact of algorithm bias on racial and ethnic disparities in health and healthcare. And as I've mentioned, we'll share the slides presented today following the webinar, so you will be able to access all of these links directly. I want to close with some key reminders to keep in mind as you complete the round 2 application. So you can find answers to additional policy and application questions in the frequently asked questions page on the A2 Pilot Awards website. You can also find all templates, examples, and reference materials that I've mentioned here, both in the resources section of the A2 Pilot Awards website and embedded in the application itself as downloadable resources or links. When you are completing the application, please note that all upload fields on the applications are PDF only, and you can only upload 1 file per upload field. Trying to upload additional files through the same field will just replace what you've previously uploaded. So for multi-item uploads that combine multiple budget forms or bio sketches, we ask that you combine the documents into 1 PDF before uploading. And when you're working with that fillable budget form, we recommend printing to PDF before combining multiple copies of the form to avoid conflicts across live fillable form fields that can occur. Applications must be submitted by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, July 30th. And we do encourage you to submit at least a little bit early rather than waiting until a few minutes before the deadline in case of technical difficulties. So allow yourself a 10 to 15 minute window at the minimum. And if you do encounter technical issues when submitting, you should contact us immediately at support@a2collective.ai. And you can also write to that support address with general application or submission platform questions. And then in contrast, if you have questions about your individual project or AITC specific policies or resources, you should contact the AITC inviting your application. And we have contact information for all 3 AITCs, both in the chat and will be included in these slides as well. And with that, I will turn it back to Rose.
Thank you so much, Kayla. Next, we're going to give the PIs a chance to share insights about what they're looking for in seeing strong round 2 applications. We have on the call with us Professor Chalapa and Abadir from Johns Hopkins, Deepak Ganesan from Mass AITC, and George Damaris from Penn AI Tech, as well as myself. We're going to take this slide off and go with Hopkins, Mass, and Penn in that order to share a few minutes of what you're looking for. Rama?
Thank you, Rose. I'm going to request my colleague, Dr. Abadir, to say something about the new thrust where biology is also being looked at, and I think Dr. Abadir is more.
And I also see Jeremy Walston. Sorry, Dr. Walston is also on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I will let Drs. Abadir and Dr. Walston address the biology issue because Alexei's battery is not there, and then I can address the general AITC expectations from our side.
Jeremy, do you want to jump in or do you want me to go through it?
Go ahead and I'll jump on if there's anything else I want to add.
Okay, so late this cycle, we issued an RFA of interest in biological applications, looking at molecular underpinnings, multi-omics, the biology of aging and how it changes in physical aging, frailty, etc., and as well as the Alzheimer's disease, specifically looking at machine learning, AI tools to analyze multimodal signals. And we're excited that we received significant number of applications. When we put the RFA, we were not sure if we will get interest because it was a later RFA, but we had a fair number of applications with interest in the biology of aging, the biology of AD, and we are currently reviewing those as well.
I think just the huge numbers of different measurements that you can get biologically from human subjects. Some of the engineering and analytical approaches are very different than things that have been done in the past, and that's why I think it's important to kind of try to move the field in that direction. So that was sort of something that was in the original grant, and the sort of wish from the NIA to do that, and it appears to be now accelerating more in that direction. So probably even more so next year.
Yeah, from my side, I think we are looking for proposals that kind of keep pace with what's going on in AI. As you know, when we started this 2020, there was a dominance of convolutional nets. Since then, we have moved on to transformers that can use multimodal data, and then the associated issues with them that need to have a lot of data, which is not always the case in our applications. So if somebody wants to write about using transformers, because that's kind of cool, but then they should also address the issue of where are they going to get the data for training it, and how are they going to take maybe existing models that are available, fine-tuning and so forth. So there has to be some details about how it's going to be used. The other thing we have noticed, we got quite a few proposals on LLMs, foundational models and so forth. I have the same issue. There's not enough data that these proposals can have, so they can just do an foundational model. So it has to be downloaded, some version, foundational models and fine-tuned. Then they should discuss the challenges they face and so forth. So we'll be looking for real strength in novel AI approaches for some of these problems. If somebody just says, oh, we are going to use a transformer, it doesn't cut it. They have to give us a little bit more details, how they plan to, implement it and what are the challenges,
Okay,
what help they may need.
thank you, Hopkins. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deepak with UMass.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you folks for coming. So, Rama and others covered some of the things I want to mention, but let me just say a few things. One is that, as Kayla pointed out, there's a few different details that are different for different sites. And so in our case in particular, the budget form is slightly different. So just remember that. I think you should have received an email that it's not a consortium form. It's sort of individual sites having different subaward from us. And so there will be different budgets. So just remember that. I think the other thing to remember is that sometimes we do get proposals where each proposal has so many sites involved, like 3, 4, 5. And so we should, at some point with a 200K budget or whatever be the budget for these pilots, it gets really unwieldy. So we encourage you, if possible, to limit it to maybe a couple of sites. But if not, and if there's a need for more, and if you can articulate that, please send us a note through the Airtable form and talk to us first. That's just the logistical side. So I would say, I think Kayla also pointed out about human subjects and the fact that experience with IRBs in this space is something that's really sort of necessary for the team. So I think we do either through letters of support or through the bio sketches, we do hope that you can show that you have experience doing the IRB approved studies, especially when it comes to aging and AD. And if you're using particular recruitment sites that they have a track record recruiting in these spaces. So that's something that we will look at from the human subject side as well. And so moving to what Rama was just talking about, which is the innovation side. I agree with what he said, which is that I think we have provided explicit feedback to some of the LOI submitters, but more generally, I think innovation in the AI or the technology side is a criteria that we will look at, and so we provided feedback saying you've improved in some of these dimensions. So, for example, if you have a technology that's already been developed and you're doing validation studies on the technology, that alone is not enough. You have to sort of look at the technology side and enhancements there as well. Similarly, if you're looking at sort of the AI side of things, then using a black box AI model is one thing, like an LLM, and just tweaking the prompts for the LLM is perhaps a little bit short of what we might expect. And so sort of think about fine tuning, think about guardrails for LLMs for the particular problem that you're trying to address. So sort of innovation, since this is an AI technology program, there's some expectation of novelty and innovation on that aspect as well. So that's something that I would encourage all of the teams to emphasize when you write your the longer proposal.
Thank you, Deepak. Turning next to George from UPenn. George Demiris.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. I'm George Demiris from the University of Pennsylvania. We're excited to move with you to round 2 and looking forward to your full applications. Just to add some points that my colleagues perhaps have already mentioned, it's important in these applications to highlight the potential for either commercialization or overall translation of your idea into practice. Ultimately, NIA is interested in funding ideas that will make an impact, that will ultimately, beyond just the 1 year, will improve the lives of older adults and their families, persons with Alzheimer's disease, depending on your target audience. So highlighting that potential for commercializing your idea or translating your idea into the real world in clinical practice, real use by real people will be important. I think it's also important to think about the data, and colleagues earlier mentioned that as well. If you have access to the data, it's important to highlight how you will have access, whether all the barriers or challenges that sometimes happen when we're trying to access large data sets have already been addressed. That speaks to the feasibility of the proposed work, given that you only have 1 year to complete this work. And also, as you write these proposals, to think about the interdisciplinary audience that will be reviewing this. So you want to provide enough information about the technology and the technological innovation that your proposal will include to address questions that our technical reviewers may have, but also address the clinical implications of your work and the research aspects of that for the health scientists and gerontologists that may be reviewing this work. And then finally, in terms of logistics, specifically for Penn AI Tech, if you have any questions as you're putting together your application, you can email our email address, which is on the website. It's pennaitech@nursing.upenn.edu, and we can schedule meetings with core leads and/or answer those questions on email if they're easy to answer. So we're looking forward to hearing from you and reading your applications.
Thanks very much, George. That's a segue to the next slide on the post-application process. We wanted to give each of the AITCs a chance to comment on what applicants can expect to happen before and after July 30th. For example, as you mentioned, George, you're soliciting emails and questions. Some might schedule interviews and solicit answers to questions through that venue or hold office hours. All applicants can expect to receive some feedback by mid-September is what we're telling them. So let's have the AITCs go beginning with Mass AI Tech, then Penn, then Hopkins on this question. So Deepak?
Yeah, I think in our case, yeah, so the Airtable contact form is the best place to contact us prior to the submission, on July 30th. So if you have any questions, if you've received the feedback from us, if you have further clarifications based on that, we encourage you to reach out as early as possible so that we can schedule a conversation between you and one of the team members. I think we've already had several of these conversations in the last week or two. The process is similar for, I think, many of the AITCs. We go through a process of reviews with a larger group of reviewers across different disciplines and expertise. And then if we have further clarifications, which often does happen, there will be multiple rounds of conversation. And you can also, oftentimes also, it's not just the technical material, but also the supporting paperwork that needs lots of rounds of revisions that we'll reach out to you.
Okay, thanks, Deepak. George, I know you already talked a little bit about it. Anything more to add?
Yeah, just to add that if you have any questions or need any help about your application, when you email this email address, Penn AI Tech, we will get back in touch with you. Like I said, we could answer the question right away, or if you needed to schedule a more in-depth discussion with one of our core leads, folks who are responding to this email will arrange for that meeting. I guess as Deepak mentioned, it's better to plan earlier, given that there is a time limit to this. So the sooner you raise your questions, concerns, or requests for assistance, the better, I think, for a smooth process. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Okay, and Hopkins.
I said ditto to both what Deepak said and George said, but please use our email if you want to contact us, not theirs, and we will route it appropriately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So this kind of shows what goes forward to the NIA and what kinds of information needs to go forward. We wanted applicants to recognize that if you're selected by an AITC as a finalist, you will need to submit additional documentation prior to award. We've kind of held it to the end so we don't burden people with all this unless there is a very strong likelihood of funding. The good news is that about 90% of the applicants have someone on their team with past NIH grants experience. So hopefully this is not too intimidating and you already know how to do most of this. So this illustrates what is required to be submitted in yellow, kind of just in time to NIA for concurrence. Thank you so much.